Hey, and welcome back to Heimler's History. So we've been in Unit 5 of AP World History, and we've been considering the massive changes that occurred as a result of the spread of industrialization. And in this final video for Unit 5, we're going to talk about how industrialization affected the lives of normal people like you and me, so let's get to it. So let's look at this under three headings: how cities changed, how families changed, and how all of this affected the environment. First, cities. Now, with the influx of migrants from rural areas into urban areas, the population of these cities exploded. And because cities weren't exactly planning for all of this new population, they began to add infrastructure willy-nilly. And to use a word like willy-nilly makes it sound like it was kind of cute, but I assure you it was patently not cute. A new kind of living structure emerged during this period known as the tenement, and when factory owners saw that their workers needed a place to live and in a dang hurry, many of them sponsored the building of these tenements. Typically, they were hastily, which is to say shoddily, constructed and poorly ventilated. And because factory workers were, as a rule, paid crummy wages, they packed themselves into these tenements like sardines. And one negative effect of living in such close and unsanitary conditions was the spread of disease. One of the main culprits was cholera, and people got this by drinking contaminated water, another benefit of tenement living, and the result was severe diarrhea and vomiting, sometimes leading to death. Did that man just say severe diarrhea in a video? I believe he did. Anyway, why were all these folks getting sick? Well, all of us who have been blessed with indoor plumbing cannot imagine a time in which such fecal conveniences were unavailable. But in these tenements, human waste was either dumped into the streets or cesspools full of it were dumped into or near the water supply. Now, to be fair, the germ theory of disease was still in its infancy and some of its conclusions were pretty fuzzy. So it wasn't altogether clear that contaminating the water supply would lead to the spread of disease. But eventually they got it, and then industrialized cities began to make efforts to solve these problems, like better sewage and better ways to remove trash from people's living spaces. Now, despite the suffering of the working class, industrialization led to a rise in the standard of living for a lot of people, specifically the growing middle class. Industrialization afforded them more wealth to purchase consumer goods and better access to education, and now, as a result of that, a new kind of worker emerged in the middle class, namely the white-collar worker. They were called white-collar workers because they dressed up in their suits and their white collars and went to the office and management jobs. And at the top of the social hierarchy were the industrialists, or the factory owners. Okay, now let's take a moment and turn our attention and see how the Industrial Revolution affected the family structure. So prior to the Industrial Revolution and the urbanization of the population, most people lived on farms and scratched out a living there. And on these farms, the whole family worked together. Enter the Industrial Revolution, and now everyone in the family is still working, but they're not working together. Families went to their factory jobs in the dark, and they returned home in the dark. They ate most of their meals in the factory with other factory workers, which is to say, not their family. So one of the most significant societal effects of the Industrial Revolution was the fracturing of the family. Now today we don't think much of the fact that families spend most of their waking hours separated from each other, but in that day and in that time it was a huge societal shift. And since we're talking about families, let's talk about the ladies. It wasn't unusual for working class women to hold down jobs in factories, but in the middle class a new reality was emerging. Wives of white-collar workers typically didn't have paid jobs at all, but instead stayed home to raise children. And in industrial nations you begin to see the rise of something called the Cult of Domesticity. And this was a way of bestowing dignity upon women, because what it said was, you are doing good work at home and valuable work at home. You're raising children who then can later make meaningful contributions to society. Also, the Cult of Domesticity taught that the woman's main goal was to make the home a haven of rest for her husband who is out in the world doing real work. Good evening, darling. I imagine you run ragged from raising our 4 children all by yourself at home, but as you know, my sandwich is not going to make itself, so scurry on. But as it turned out, there were some women in the world who grew tired of making their husbands sandwiches and believed that they had more to offer the world than childbearing and tuna salad. And so you began seeing women raise their voices for their rights during this period. A good example is the Seneca Falls Convention in 1848 in the United States. Here, women gathered and produced a document called the Declaration of Sentiments, which borrowed its language heavily from the American Declaration of Independence with a few saucy additions. For example, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal. You taste that sauce? Now, it would be many years and many decades before women gained equal rights with men in America and around the world, but it was movements like this that marked its beginning. Okay, and finally, let's talk about the environmental effects of the Industrial Revolution. Now, because fossil fuels like coal and petroleum were the driving engines of industrialization, there were some serious environmental consequences. It was during this time that a new word entered the English lexicon: smog. It was a combination of smoke and fog. And when it set upon a city it choked the inhabitants and caused endless respiratory troubles for all who lived there. And as I mentioned earlier, both human and industrial waste was dumped into rivers, and that, of course, polluted the water supply. And it created the occasion for the spread of diseases like cholera and other kinds of bacterial woes. Right, that's what you need to know about Unit 5, Topic 9 of AP World History. If you're happy that industrialization has caused the occasion for you to be watching this video right now, then subscribe and come along. And if you need help getting an A in your class and a 5 in your exam, then consider checking out my review packet for AP World History. And I promise that no children or underpaid women were exploited in the making of said packet. Heimler out.